No, this is fine. We can continue in this informal vein. I want to first of all greet my fellow panelists, Chairman H.K. Dua, with whom I've served on the Standing Committee on External Affairs of the Parliament. I think in order of proximity, my dear friend Ambassador Adman Singh, whom I've had the pleasure of witnessing at close quarters as Ambassador in Washington. Ambassador Surendra Kumar, who is the founder and animating spirit of IFA. Gurcharan Das, indeed a fellow author on the Mahabharata, and very different vein from mine, but also somebody with whom I've shared many a common view and the occasional disagreement over the last couple of decades. And Vaheguru Pal Singh Sidhu at the other end, a good friend on two continents. I'm very pleased to see back on the right continent after his long stint in America. Surendra, thank you so much for your kind remarks at the beginning. I didn't notice that you weren't calling me Shashi during my ministership, but I guess it points to the brevity of the ministership that I didn't have to endure your formality, but thank you for putting me back on first name terms. And I truly am flattered by your Mahabharata Kurukshetra analogy of my sort of rising from the ashes. The only problem with the Kurukshetra analogy, of course, is that in this particular version of the epic, it seems the good guys didn't win. So we've been left with a few things to take care of thereafter.
No, we're not defining good guys.
I am. I cannot pretend to this upright lack of bias that the chairman has, because I represent a particular party and that point of view of that party. Having said that, I will be leaving the field to the upright and neutral, because unfortunately I have to leave at 7:30 in order to participate in a video conference, or as they now call a Google Hangout, with members of the Atlantic Council in Washington. So forgive me if I'm departing midway through. Whoever is speaking at 7:30, I assure you it is not a vote of protest at all. But having said that, I'm very relieved that I am the first speaker, because listening to our chairman just now, it suddenly struck me that he has not only touched all the right bases on this topic, but that I suspect that every speaker is going to touch exactly the same basis. I mean, this is a topic which, this early in the administration, in the Modi government's reign, doesn't give us anything more than these very parameters that H.K. Dua has spelled out. So I would have been extremely unhappy, I think, to be the final speaker. I was in that position once, when at the United Nations there was a similar panel discussion, and after lunch that too, where I think I was the seventh speaker, and after listening to the first six all touch on more or less the same theme, I began by saying that I felt like Elizabeth Taylor's seventh husband, that I knew what was expected of me, but I really didn't know how to do it any differently. But anyway, that's...
Take 2 minutes more, and the yellow will come.
But anyway, now I'm the first speaker. I can say pretty much everything you've said in different words and then leave it to the next speaker to find a third way of saying the same thing. But since Surendra Kumar saddled us with his three adjectives, robust, pragmatic, and practical, let me start off by saying that the precise problem with that is that robust is very rarely pragmatic, or indeed, for that matter, practical. Though perhaps one can parse the differences between pragmatic and practical further. And I want to also preface my remarks by stressing that we have a long-standing tradition in our country, which certainly Dua Saab and I have been active witnesses of in the Standing Committee on External Affairs, that foreign policy doesn't belong to any particular party, that it is India's foreign policy we discuss and not a party's foreign policy, and that our differences therefore stop at the water's edge or at the barbed wire fences on the borders, if you wish. And therefore, I speak really from henceforth not, despite my earlier barbs, as a particular party member, but really as an Indian who's had the satisfaction of participating in some of our foreign policy initiatives and observing the lot from both close and far. Having said that, let me say that one of the concerns that many well-intentioned and neutral observers, as well as less neutral ones like myself, had about foreign policy with the campaign of Mr. Modi and the BJP was precisely some of the disquieting remarks that both the individual and the party made during the election campaign, which had created some legitimate grounds for disquiet, for concern, I beg your pardon, I've already said disquieting remarks, for concern both in our country and abroad. I think you all know what I'm referring to. We've already seen and heard some reactions during the campaign itself. A minister of the Pakistani government made some very anxious statements. I think they were both anonymously sourced and other reactions coming from Bangladesh after Mr. Modi announced that a number of people should be prepared to pack their bags and cross the border if he won on the 16th. His statements in Tamil Nadu about Sri Lanka did not exactly calm any worries in Colombo. And certainly there was a concern that some of the rather bellicose rhetoric, both of the principal candidate and his fellow travelers, including one who, as you remember, said that everybody who didn't vote for Mr. Modi should proceed to move to Pakistan, which would certainly have given that country a rather severe population problem, since 69% of India didn't in the end vote for Mr. Modi. Given all of that, I think it was understandable that there was some concern. But there I must say that the 2 weeks that have passed since the election results were announced on the 16th of this month have been enormously reassuring, I think, both to those of us in this country who were worried and those abroad who were anxious. Indeed, as our chairman suggested, a masterstroke perhaps was the totally unexpected invitation to the 7 members of SARC and an 8th neighbor. That was a bit of Indian chauvinism at work, since Mauritius is not a member of SARC, but it does have a 63% Indian population. And those 8 countries being invited in an unprecedented manner for the extraordinarily grand inauguration ceremony of the new Prime Minister and his government, that certainly sent a remarkably positive signal to countries that here was somebody who was willing to think out of the box and who was willing to engage with them. I might add that, and I say this obviously somewhat ruefully as a congressman, that the size and scale of Mr. Modi's and the BJP's majority has also had a powerfully liberating effect, I think, on the possibilities available to the new government. Not only does it liberate them from the compulsions of coalition dharma, which I'll come back to briefly when I discuss specific policies, but it's also liberated them from the prison of their own rhetoric. Because when you have an absolute majority in parliament and cannot lose the government on any issue, let alone a foreign policy issue, you are free to be as creative, as innovative, and indeed to depart as much from your previous state positions as you may choose to wish to do. And that, I think, is a blessing that no Indian government has had since 1989. And I think it's something which should be weighed, its value should be weighed with great care and responsibility by those in the business of making foreign policy in the new government. Let me quickly race through a few of the key countries, as HK has done. On Pakistan, of course, it is significant that he extended the invitation to President Nawaz Sharif and greeted him as he did as an honored guest, because, as you know, a lot of BJP spokesmen during their time in opposition had not only made a number of very harsh comments about Pakistan, but had been a very severe constraint on the contribution of public opinion to the UPA's own shackles on dealing with Pakistan. In other words, the consensual position that emerged during UPA 2 or any time after 2008, 26 November, that there can be no substantive talks with Pakistan and each other's countries until and unless there was significant progress in pursuing, prosecuting and punishing the perpetrators of 26/11 and their allies, and until there was visible progress in dismantling the infrastructure of terror from which attacks had been mounted on India and on Indian interests in Afghanistan. That position was, of course, something that the BJP held the Congresses or the UPA's nose to the grindstone about. It would have been extremely difficult for a UPA Prime Minister to invite the Pakistani Prime Minister to his inauguration. But of course, it was possible for Mr. Modi to do so, and that itself should be a signal to Pakistan that a number of cards are on the table that might have been off the table over the last few years. And certainly the talk of moving towards greater normalcy in economic relations, I'll return to that in a minute, offers a promising beginning. Sri Lanka, the visit to Mr. Rajapaksa, despite the vociferous objections of Tamil parties, was another strong sign of an independent foreign policy. I mean independent in terms of Delhi being independent of other state capitals. What we saw there is something, again, that would not have been possible for UPA to do quite so easily, for the reasons of coalition politics that Mr. Modi is no longer hobbled by. And those two examples, of course, are striking. On Bangladesh, it so happened that the one head of government who had a prior international commitment that could not be changed was indeed the president of Bangladesh, who had to go to Japan on a state visit. But nonetheless, the speaker came, was well received, and I'm sure that will be a future priority. On other issues, very clearly, the visa constraint will not matter on the US anymore, and that has been made clear by both President Obama and Secretary Kerry. On China, we've already seen some remarkably positive steps, the phone call recently of the Prime Minister, the announced visit of the Foreign Minister. And it's worthwhile remembering that the Chief Minister of Gujarat, when that's what Mr. Modi was, traveled 4 times to China during his chief ministership. And that suggests that some of the bellicose rhetoric about the border we've heard from the BJP over the last few years will not be the dominant strain in the Prime Minister's attitudes to that country. With regard to Europe, since my good friend, the Ambassador of Iceland, is here, let me say that as the continent that was the first to reach out to him quite formally and significantly as an opposition leader, I think Europe will surely receive some token of gratitude in terms of engagement. And then Japan should be remembered, because this is one country, it's sometimes mentioned and sometimes overlooked that Mr. Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, only follows 3 people on Twitter in the entire world, and one of them is Narendra Modi. There are various affinities that suggests, and I think that one should find Japan gaining in importance in terms of Indian parameters. One footnote is that Africa, which is a continent that I had some role in trying to improve our contact and cooperation with during my brief stint in the MEA, would, I think, conceivably arrive on Mr. Modi's radar screen via our Gujarati community there, which I think should be able to bring in a significant commercial aspect into our engagement with that continent. And that brings me to my final point, as you don't need to get up with the red rose, and that is that I suspect that this foreign policy is going to be marked by a far greater emphasis on economic relations than on the kind of bellicose political rhetoric and geostrategic and military rhetoric we've heard for many years from the party that Mr. Modi heads. I think that, well, some of that was necessary in opposition, and some of that definitely represents a real strain of thinking in the party, that the principal parameter is likely to be economic engagement, as we've seen in Mr. Modi's attitude to China. And I would say that from the point of view of a UPA government, we would applaud such a vision, because our vision was very clear on this. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh articulated very clearly the doctrine that the entire purpose of our foreign and security policy ought to be to protect and promote the domestic transformation of India, the development of India, create a climate where investors will want to come, where we can work towards abolishing poverty. And the importance of that is what made us worry about the kind of rhetoric we were getting from the BJP, because we felt that if you paint yourself into a corner, for example, threatening reprisals against Pakistan, so that if there is an incident on the border, as you know, there was one 2 days after Mr. Modi won the election, that somehow you'd feel obliged to react differently from the UPA and react more irresponsibly, with the result that, of course, you will find your fundamental objective of economic change being affected, because investors will not come to a war zone, they will flee. And this vision, which we were very clear about, we thought was perhaps absent from the minds of the BJP. But I would think that from what we've seen in these early days, the pragmatic part of your title, Surendra, will outstrip the word robust in it. I think we'll have robust rhetoric and pragmatic action with a strong economic component. And that is the right approach for this increasingly networked world we live in. But on that, since my time is up. I will refer you to my book, Pax Indica, which leaves, I hope, a prescription that can usefully be followed by even a non-UPA government in the years to come. Thank you very much.